Shalom and welcome back to another session with your sister Shaya Loya. Don't forget to share this video to someone who may need to hear it and subscribe to the YouTube page if you already haven't. And let's remember to be in the spirit of giving. Lots of things we need for the community outreach. So whatever you can donate, do not hesitate. We are in need of clothing, shoes, food, snacks, arts and crafts, etc. So if you'd like to deliver something in person, if you're in Atlanta, you can, or like to mail something to the address, you can email me or hit me in the inbox. And all of the links to support the ministry are below. So we are currently trying to locate some land near St. Petersburg, Virginia, in Pocahontas Island, for sisters that are looking for a new horizon, renewed happiness, a childlike love that you feel like you've been missing for some time now. Let us bring your remembrance back of the love that was here for you from the inception of your creation, even in spirit. Yes, only loving husbands will be allowed. Please don't bring your demons. We will exile them. Okay, so yesterday we were reading the Gospel of the Holy Life, or the Holy 12. And in the last chapter, we were talking about transmutation, but it didn't really go into detail about it. So this book we touched on during the Passover in regards to blood sacrifice and the woman and her menstruation cycle, and whether she was allowed to actually partake in the Passover ritual or ceremony. So this book again is called The Golden Bough, and the link to it will be in the description if it already isn't. So the Transference of Evil. Let me share my screen. The transference to inanimate objects. So we have now traced the practice of killing a god among peoples in the hunting, pastoral, and agricultural stages of society. And I have attempted to explain the motives which led men to adopt so curious a custom. One aspect of the custom still remains to be noticed. The accumulated misfortunes and sins of the whole people are sometimes laid upon the dying God, who is supposed to bear them away forever, leaving the people innocent and happy. The notion that we can transfer our guilt and sufferings to some other being who will bear them for us is familiar to the savage mind. It arises from a very obvious confusion between the physical and the mental, between the material and the immaterial. Because it is possible to shift a load of wood, stones, or whatnot from our own back to the back of another, the savage fancies that it is equally possible to shift the burden of his pains and sorrows to another, who will suffer them in his stead. Upon this idea he acts, and the result is an endless number of very unamiable devices for palming off upon someone else the trouble which a man shrinks from bearing himself. In short, the principle of vicarious suffering is commonly understood and practiced by races who stand on a low level of social and intellectual culture. In the following pages, I shall illustrate the theory and the practice as they are found among savages in all their naked simplicity, undisguised by the refinements of metaphysics and the subtleties of theology. The devices to which the cunning and selfish savage resorts for the sake of easing himself at the expense of his neighbor are manifold. Only a few typical examples out of a multitude can be cited. At the outset, it is to be observed that the evil of which a man seeks to rid himself need not be transferred to a person. It may equally well be transferred to an animal or a thing, though in the last case, the thing is often only a vehicle to convey the trouble to the first person who touches it. In some of the East Indian islands, they think that epilepsy can be cured by striking the patient on the face with leaves of a certain tree and then throwing them away. The disease is believed to have passed into the leaves and to have been thrown away with them. To cure toothache, some of the Australian blacks apply a heated spear thrower to the cheek. The spear thrower is then cast away, and the toothache goes with it in the shape of a black stone called karich. Stones of this kind are found in old mounds and sand hills. They are carefully collected and thrown in the direction of enemies in order to give them toothache. The Bohemian, a pastoral people of Uganda, often suffer from deep-seated abscesses. Their cure for this is to transfer the disease to some other person by obtaining herbs from the medicine man, rubbing them over the place where the swelling is, and burying them in the road where people continually pass. The first person who steps over these buried herbs contracts the disease, and the original patient recovers. Sometimes, in case of sickness, the malady is transferred to an effigy as a preliminary to passing it on to a human being. Thus, among the Baganda, the medicine man would sometimes make a model of his patient in clay. Then a relative of the sick man would rub the image over the sufferer's body and either bury it in the road, it in the grass by the wayside. The first person who stepped over the image or passed by it would catch the disease. Sometimes the effigy was made out of a plantain flower, tied up so as to look like a person. It was used in the same way as the clay figure, but the use of images for this maleficent purpose was a capital crime. Any person caught in the act of burying one of them in the public road would surely have been put to death. In the western district of the island Timor, when men or women are making long and tiring journeys, they fan themselves with leafy branches, which they afterwards throw away on particular spots where their forefathers did the same before them. The fatigue which they felt is thus supposed to have passed into the leaves and to be left behind. Others use stones instead of leaves. Similarly, in the Barber archipelago, tired people will strike themselves with stones, believing that they thus transfer to the stones the weariness which they felt in their own bodies. They then throw away the stones in places which are specially set apart for the purpose. A like belief and practice in many distant parts of the world have given rise to those cairns, or heaps of sticks and leaves which travelers often observe beside the path, and to which every passing native adds his contribution in the shape of a stone or stick or leaf. Thus, in the Solomon and Banks Islands, the natives are wont to throw sticks, stones, or leaves upon a heap at a place of steep descent or where a difficult path begins, saying, "There goes my fatigue." The act is not a religious rite, for the thing thrown on the heap is not an offering to spiritual powers, and the words which accompany the act are not a prayer. It is nothing but a magical ceremony for getting rid of fatigue, which the simple savage fancies he can embody in a stick, leaf, or stone, and so cast it from him. 2. The transference to animals. Animals are often employed as a vehicle for carrying away or transferring the evil. When a Moor has a headache, he will sometimes take a lamb or goat and beat it till it falls down, believing that the headache will thus be transferred to the animal. In Morocco, most wealthy Moors keep a wild boar in their stables in order that the jinn and evil spirits may be diverted from the horses and enter into the boar. Among the Caffres of South Africa, when other remedies have failed, natives sometimes adopt the custom of taking a goat into the presence of a sick man and confess the sins of the kraal over the animal. Sometimes a few drops of blood from the sick man are allowed to fall on the head of the goat, which is turned out into an uninhabited part of the veldt. The sickness is supposed to be transferred to the animal and to become lost in the desert. In Arabia, when the plague is raging, the people will sometimes lead a camel through all the quarters of the town in order that the animal may take the pestilence on itself. Then they strangle it in a sacred place and imagine that they have rid themselves of the camel and of the plague at one blow. It is said that when smallpox is raging, the savages of Formosa will drive the demon of disease into a sow, then cut off the animal's ears and burn them or it, believing that in this way they rid themselves of the plague. Horrible. Amongst the Malagasy, the vehicle for carrying away evils is called a faditra. The faditra is anything selected by this Sikiti divining board for the purpose of taking away any hurtful evils or diseases that might prove injurious to an individual's happiness, peace, or prosperity. The faditra may be either ashes, cut money, a sheep, a pumpkin, or anything else the Sikiti may choose to direct. After the particular article is appointed, the priest counts upon it all the evils that may prove injurious to the person for whom it is made, and which he then charges the faditra to take away forever. If the faditra be ashes, it is blown, to be carried away by the wind. If it be cut money, it is thrown to the bottom of deep water, or where it can never be found. If it be a sheep, it is carried away to a distance on the shoulders of a man who runs with all his might, mumbling as he goes, as if in the greatest rage against the faditra, for the evils it is bearing away. If it be a pumpkin, it is carried on the shoulders to a little distance, and there dashed upon the ground with every appearance of fury and indignation. A Malagasy was informed by a diviner that he was doomed to a bloody death, but that possibly he might avert his fate by performing a certain rite. Carrying a small vessel full of blood upon his head, he was to mount upon the back of a bullock. While thus mounted, he was to spill the blood upon the bullock's head and then send the animal away into the wilderness, whence it might never return. The Bataks of Sumatra have a ceremony which they call making the curse to fly away. When a woman is childless, a sacrifice is offered to the gods of 3 grasshoppers, representing a head of cattle, a buffalo, and a horse. Then a swallow is set free, with a prayer that the curse may fall upon the bird and fly away with it. The entrance into a house of an animal which does not generally seek to share the abode of man is regarded by the Malays as ominous of misfortune. If a wild bird flies into a house, it must be carefully caught and smeared with oil, and must then be released in the open air, a formula being recited in which it is bidden to fly away with all the ill luck and misfortunes of the occupier. In antiquity, Greek women seem to have done the same with swallows, which they caught in the house. They poured oil on them and let them fly away, apparently for the purpose of removing ill luck from the household. The Huzuls of the Carpathians imagine that they can transfer freckles to the first swallow they see in spring by washing their face in flowing water and saying, "Swallow, swallow, take my freckles and give me rosy cheeks. Among the Badagas of the Nilgiri Hills in southern India, when a death has taken place, the sins of the deceased are laid upon a buffalo calf. For this purpose, the people gather round the corpse and carry it outside of the village. There, an elder of the tribe, standing at the head of the corpse, recites or chants a long list of sins such as any Badaga may commit, and the people repeat the last word of each line after him. The confession of sins is thrice repeated. By a conventional mode of expression, the sum total of sins a man may do is said to be 1,300. Admitting that the deceased has committed them all, the performer cries aloud, "Stay not their flight to God's pure feet." As he closes, the whole assembly chants aloud, "Stay not their flight." Again, the performer enters into details and their substitute, while they themselves, clad in new raiment, mixed with the people till evening. Did I go too far? I did. Okay, so again, the performer enters into details and cries, "He killed the crawling snake. It is a sin." In a moment, the last word is caught up, and all the people cry, "It is a sin." As they shout, the performer lays his hand upon the calf. The sin is transferred to the calf. Thus, the whole catalog is gone through in this impressive way. But this is not enough. As the last shout, "Let all be well," dies away, the performer gives place to another, and again confession is made, and all the people shout, "It is a sin." A third time it is done. Then, still in solemn silence, the calf is let loose. Like the Jewish scapegoat, it may never be used for secular work. At a Badaga funeral witnessed by the Reverend A.C. Clayton, the buffalo calf was led thrice round the bier, and the dead man's hand was laid on its head. By this act, the calf was supposed to receive all the sins of the deceased. It was then driven away to a great distance that it might contaminate no one, and it was said that it would never be sold, but looked on as a dedicated sacred animal. The idea of this ceremony is that the sins of the deceased enter the calf, or that the task of his absolution is laid on it. They say that the calf very soon disappears and that it is never heard of. 3. The transference to men. Again, men sometimes play the part of scapegoat by diverting to themselves the evils that threaten others. When a Singalese is dangerously ill and the physicians can do nothing, a devil dancer is called in, who, by making offerings to the devils and dancing in the mask appropriate to them, conjures these demons of disease, one after the other, out of the sick man's body and into his own. Having thus successfully extracted the cause of the malady, the artful dancer lies down on a bier and, shamming death, is carried to an open place outside the village. Here, being left to himself, he soon comes to life again and hastens back to claim his reward. In 1590, a Scotch witch of the name of Agnes Sampson was convicted of curing a certain Robert Kurz of a disease laid upon him by a Westlock warlock when he was at Dumfries. Wilk's sickness she took upon herself, and kept the same with great groaning and torment till the morn. At Wilk time there was a great din heard in the house. The noise was made by the witch in her effort to shift the disease, by means of clothes, from herself to a cat or dog. Unfortunately, the attempt partly miscarried. The disease missed the animal and hit Alexander Douglas of Dalkeith, who dwindled and died of it, while the original patient, Robert Kurz, was made whole. In one part of New Zealand, an expiation for sin was felt to be necessary. A service was performed over an individual by which all the sins of the tribe were supposed to be transferred to him. A fern stalk was previously tied to this person, with which he jumped into the river and there unbinding, allowed it to float away to the sea, bearing their sins with it. In great emergencies, the sins of the Raja of Manipur used to be transferred to somebody else, usually to a criminal, who earned his pardon by his vicarious sufferings. To effect the transference, the Raja and his wife, clad in fine robes, bathed on a scaffold erected in the bazaar, while the criminal crouched beneath it. With the water which dripped from them on him, their sins also were washed away and fell on the human scapegoat. To complete the transference, the Raja and his wife made over their fine robes to their substitute, while they themselves, clad in new raiment, mixed with the people till evening. In Travancore, when a Raja is near his end, they seek out a holy Brahmin who consents to take upon himself the sins of the dying man in consideration of the sum of 10,000 rupees. Thus prepared to immolate himself on the altar of duty, the saint is introduced into the chamber of death and closely embraces the dying Raja, saying to him, "O king, I undertake to bear all your sins and diseases. May your highness live long and reign happily." Having thus taken to himself the sins of the sufferer, he is sent away from the country and never more allowed to return. At Ukkurgan in Turkestan, Mr. Scholier saw an old man who was said to get his living by taking on himself the sins of the dead, and thenceforth devoting his life to prayer for their souls. In Uganda, when an army had returned from war, and the gods warned the king by their oracles that some evil had attached itself to the soldiers, it was customary to pick out a woman slave from the captives, together with a cow, a goat, a fowl, and a dog from the booty, and to send them back under a strong guard to the borders of the country from which they had come. There their limbs were broken, and they were left to die, for they were too crippled to crawl back to Uganda. In order to ensure the transference of the evil to these substitutes, bunches of grass were rubbed over the people and cattle and then tied to the victims. After that, the army was pronounced clean and was allowed to return to the capital. So on his accession, a new king of Uganda used to wound a man and send him away as a scapegoat to Bunyoro to carry away any uncleanliness that might attach to the king or queen. The examples of the transference of evil in Europe. The examples of the transference of evil hitherto adduced have been mostly drawn from the customs of savage or barbarous peoples, but similar attempts to shift the burden of disease, misfortune, and sin from oneself to another person or to an animal or thing have been common also among the civilized nations of Europe, both in ancient and modern times. A Roman cure for fever was to pare the patient's nails and stick the parings with wax on a neighbor's door before sunrise. The fever then passed from the sick man to his neighbor. Similar devices must have been resorted to by the Greeks, for in laying down laws for his ideal state, Plato thinks it too much to expect that men should not be alarmed at finding certain wax figures adhering to their doors or to the tombstones of their parents, or lying at crossroads. In the 4th century of our era, Marcellus of Bordeaux prescribed a cure for warts, which has still a great vogue among the superstitious in various parts of Europe. You are to touch your warts with as many little stones as you have warts. Then wrap the stones in an ivy leaf and throw them in a thoroughfare. Whoever picks them up will get the warts, and you will be rid of them. People in the Orkney Islands will sometimes wash a sick man and then throw the water down a gateway in the belief that the sickness will leave the patient and be transferred to the first person who passes through the gate. A barbarian cure for fever is to write up on a piece of paper, "Fever, stay away, I am not at home," and to put the paper in somebody's pocket. The latter then catches the fever and the patient is rid of it. A Bohemian prescription for the same malady is this: take an empty pot, go with it to a crossroad, throw it down, and run away. The first person who kicks against the pot will catch your fever, and you will be cured. Often in Europe, as among savages, an attempt is made to transfer a pain or malady from a man to an animal. Grave writers of antiquity recommended that if a man be stung by a scorpion, he should sit upon an ass with his face to the tail, or whisper in the animal's ear, "A scorpion has stung me." In either case, they thought the pain would be transferred from the man to the ass. Many cures of this sort are recorded for Marcellus. For example, he tells us that the following is a remedy for toothache: standing booted under the open sky on the ground, you catch a frog by the head, spit into its mouth, ask it to carry away the ache, and then let it go. But the ceremony must be performed on a lucky day and at a lucky hour. In Cheshire, the ailment known as apta or thrush, which affects the mouth or throat of infants, is not uncommonly treated in much the same manner. A young frog is held for a few moments with its head inside the mouth of the sufferer, whom it is supposed to relieve by taking the malady to itself. "I assure you," said an old woman who had often superintended such a cure, "we used to hear the poor frog whooping and coughing mortal bad for days after. It would have made your heart ache to hear the poor creature coughing as it did about the garden." A Northamptonshire, Devonshire, and Welsh cure for a cough is to put a hair of the patient's head between two slices of buttered bread and give the sandwich to a dog. The animal will thereupon catch the cough and the patient will lose it. Sometimes an ailment is transferred to an animal by sharing food with it. Thus, in Oldenburg, if you are sick of a fever, you set a bowl of sweet milk before a dog and say, "Good luck, you hound. May you be sick and I be sound." Then when the dog has lapped some of the milk, you take a swig at the bowl, and then the dog must lap again, and then you must swig again. And when you and the dog have done it the third time, he will have the fever and you will be quit of it. Definitely some European stuff. Anyway, a Bohemian cure for fever is to go out into the forest before the sun is up and look for a snipe's nest. When you have found it, take out one of the young birds and keep it beside you for 3 days. Then go back into the wood and set the snipe free. The fever will leave you at once. The snipe has taken it away. So in Vedic times, the Hindus of old sent consumption away with the blue jay. They said, "O consumption, fly away with the blue jay. With the wild rush of the storm and the whirlwind, oh, vanish away." In the village of Langdagla in Wales, there is a church dedicated to the Virgin Martyr Saint Tila, where the falling sickness is, or used to be, cured by being transferred to a fowl. The patient first washed his limbs in a sacred well hard by, dropped fourpence into it as an offering, walked thrice round the well, and thrice repeated the Lord's Prayer. Then the fowl, which was a cock or a hen, according as the patient was a man or a woman, was put into a basket and carried round first the well and afterwards the church. Next, the sufferer entered the church and lay down under the communion table till break of day. After that, he offered sixpence and departed, leaving the fowl in the church. If the bird died, the sickness was supposed to have been transferred to it from the man or woman, who was now rid of the disorder. As late as 1855, The old parish clerk of the village remembered quite well to have seen the birds staggering about from the effects of the fits which had been transferred to them. Often the sufferer seeks to shift his burden of sickness or ill luck to some inanimate object. In Athens, there is a little chapel of St. John the Baptist built against an ancient column. Fever patients resort thither, and by attaching a wax thread to the inner side of the column, believe that they transfer the fever from themselves to the pillar. In the Mark of Brandenburg, they say that if you suffer from giddiness, you should strip yourself naked and run thrice round a flax field after sunset. In that way, the flax will get the giddiness and you will be rid of it. But perhaps the thing most commonly employed in Europe as a receptacle for sickness and trouble of all sorts is a tree or bush. A Bulgarian cure for fever is to run thrice around a willow tree at sunrise, crying, "The fever shall shake thee, and the sun shall warm me." In the Greek island of Carpathos, the priest ties a red thread round the neck of a sick person. Next morning, the friends of the patient remove the thread and go out to the hillside where they tie the thread to a tree, thinking that they thus transfer the sickness to the tree. Italians attempt to cure fever in like manner by tethering it to a tree. The sufferer ties the thread round his left wrist at night and hangs the thread on a tree next morning. The fever is thus believed to be tied up to the tree and the patient to be rid of it. But he must be careful not to pass by that tree again. Otherwise, the fever would break loose from its bonds and attack him afresh. A Flemish cure for the ague is to go early in the morning to an old willow, tie 3 knots in one of its branches, say, "Good morrow, old one, I give thee the cold. Good morrow, old one," then turn and run away without looking round. In Sonnenberg, you would rid yourself of gout. You should go to a young fir tree and tie a knot in one of its twigs, saying, "God greet thee, noble fir. I bring thee my gout. Here will I tie a knot and bind my gout into it, in the name," etc. Another way of transferring gout from a man to a tree is this: pare the nails of the sufferer's fingers in clips, clip some hairs from his legs, bore a hole in an oak, stuff the nails and hair in the hole, stop up the hole again, and smear it with cow's dung. If for 3 months thereafter the patient is free of gout, you may be sure the oak has it in his stead. In Cheshire, if you would be rid of warts, you have only to rub them with a piece of bacon. Cut a slit in the bark of an ash tree and slip the bacon under the bark. Soon the warts will disappear from your hand, only, however, to reappear in the shape of rough excrescences or knobs on the bark tree. At Berkhamsted in Hertfordshire, there used to be certain oak trees which were long celebrated for the cure of ague. The transference of the malady to the tree was simple but painful. A lock of the sufferer's hair was pegged into an oak. Then, by a sudden wrench, he left his hair and his ague behind him in the tree. Okay, and I'm just going to end it at that. That's just a little bit on the transmutation, which is where a lot of the occult's origins comes from, is the putting your evil onto somebody else. So we see that a lot, especially in religious communities. A lot of people don't like accountability and they don't want to be held accountable for their evil. They try to act like they're not evil. They try to throw their evil off on you, make you seem like you're crazy when you know that you're doing nothing but trying to be righteous and walk the righteous path. But these demons that have been loosed on the earth, they are out to destroy, kill, and take whatever it is they can. So you know, the Holy Spirit just keeps leading me to keep pushing to put out information, because sisters are going through it right now. Sisters are going through it. Sisters are crying and dying, and it's crazy. They drugging themselves. It's the elder sisters, not just young sisters, elder sisters who've been in relationships for 30-40 years with the same man, and he's still the same demon. So it's just crazy right now. And to think that other sisters are pushing for other women to stay with these devils, and they speak out against us women who are speaking up for sisters that are going through it, and they try to make you look bad for speaking up for your sisters. Even when it came to the story of Dinah and her brothers coming to her rescue, they made that look bad. They made it all about the brotherhood, basically, of the nations, because they were going to make their father look bad by helping their sister. So yes, I stand up for my sisters. I am for women's empowerment. I don't know what it means to be a feminist. I'm just a brown woman that love my peoples, and that's all I know. So let me get off here before I get in my feelings, y'all. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for listening. It's your sister Shia. Shalom.